My name is Councillor Mahbub Hussain. I'm a Vice Councillor. Today is the Audit Committee of Buckinghamshire Milton Keynes Fire Authority. I'm Vice Chairman of the Overview and Audit Committee. Although members of the public are able to attend and observe in person, following the meeting, a video recording will be uploaded to the authority's YouTube channel. We are joined today by Councillors Shadow, welcome today, and to act as a substitute at today's meeting. Some of our officers are joining us remotely via Microsoft Teams in order to facilitate the best possible experience for all those participating in the meeting and for those who may want to watch the recording of the meeting. Can I please ask those participating in the meeting remotely to switch off your microphone and cameras when not speaking. If remote participant wishes to speak during the meeting, please turn on your camera to indicate a wish to respond to a question or to make a comment. The first item of the business is the election of the chairman. I wish now ask Graham to ask for a nomination for chairman for 22 and 23.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I have a nomination, please, for the position of chairman for 22-23?
Thank you. I'd like to propose David Carroll, not just because he's sitting next to me, because he's a very good chairman. I think his experience and professionalism will guide us through the team. So I propose David Carroll.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I have a seconder?
Second.
Are there any other nominations? There being no other nominations, I can confirm that Councillor Carroll is elected by silent assent.
Thank you very much.
So David, I think we can be on chairs. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, Emily.
Hello.
How are you?
Thank you.
Excellent. Right, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you very much, Mahbub, for doing that part of the business, and thank you for new members who are attending today. Hope you enjoyed the meeting. It's very challenging sometimes, but it's the most, as far as I'm concerned, the most important committee in the organisation because we obviously look at all the business. We move on. Appointment of the vice chairman. I will propose Mahbub Hussain. Is there a seconder? Thank you very much. Apologies, Katie.
Sorry, are there any other nominations?
Sorry, any other nominations?
Position of vice chair.
Stop looking at me.
I was actually looking at Robin, but there.
Oh.
Well, I thought it was a private party. I wasn't.
You're always part of, you're always come to my parties. You're always come to my parties.
Private affair, I wasn't going to be now.
I think let's just get on.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
There being no other nominations, Councillor Hussain is the vice chair.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very
for
much.
the support. Thank you very much.
Apologies, Katie.
None, Chairman.
Minutes. Any questions or observations on the minutes? The 16th of March. Anyone? No? Matters arising. So, Robert. Oh, Robin.
I'd just like to say, Chairman, that it's really good that we passed the timely so that we can't agree to add the climate change to the climate action corporate plan. But at the last meeting, that seemed to be in the right decision at the right time, Chairman. As what's turned out has happened now, that confirms that we were correct to take that decision.
Absolutely, and I do remember the occasion, and it was an interesting discussion, but we got to the right decision, and thank everybody who contributed to that. Now quite right about it, weren't we?
Is what's happened in recent weeks and time zone. It would allow us to have more focus on that and it's more prominent. If you look nationally what's happened, how busy the fire authorities have been, and how short-staffed they are nationally, and how underfunded they are nationally. Hopefully this brings some good news to the fire authority from the incoming collection of people who are going to be the government.
Right, let's keep that there. Okay, anyway, item 5, Mark Hemmings, do you want to give an update?
Okay, well, you want to propose?
I don't know exam session again, please, Chairman.
That's fine.
Let's meet you.
Bill?
Want to propose? I'm happy to agree the minutes.
Yes, that's right. Thanks,
Yeah.
Bill. That's great. Any other observations? Disclosure of interest? Anyone at all? Questions, Katie?
None, Chairman. Sorry, I appreciate that this is because it's about events that happened yesterday in Milton Keynes. I just had a question about, so obviously we had a major incident in Milton Keynes yesterday. And very luckily, as I understand it, there was no loss of life whatsoever. And considering that that involved also a nursery, that was really, really, really well done. But I wanted just to understand, it took quite a long time to get under control. And whether we felt that we had the right number of appliances be able to respond to that incident in a timely way, I think is an important one for us to understand as a board.
I can give it an update. I'm in the process. We were very busy yesterday, and I'm in the process of putting together a brief for members because we didn't just have that one incident in Milton Keynes. We had 2 simultaneous major incidents that were declared, plus 3 other significant fires, plus 2 road traffic collisions. So, in answer to your question, did we have enough appliances? London ran out as well. So, nationally, we were relying on a lot of mutual aid. And even that was beginning to dry up. So we were looking at national resilience. And just for information, Tyne we sent 2 appliances to Norfolk last night. So, you know, that's how stretched the country was. As I say, I'm putting a brief together that covers everything that we did yesterday. I will say the crews acted magnificently with what they had and did a phenomenal job. With regard to the Milton Keynes incident, actually bringing that one under control, that was quite rapid from what they were faced with when they arrived. So the crews did work really hard and they were assisted by our partners with Thames Valley Police, South Central Ambulance and the water undertakers as well to increase the pressure. So there was a lot that went on to that, but I will be sending out a much more detailed brief. I've got page 1 of it here. But in answer to your question, a day like yesterday was unprecedented in my 32 years service. I've never ever experienced a day like that. And it was something that was sort of beyond, you know, what we've ever not planned for, but it was having 5 significant incidents all running at the same time in a 3 to 4 hour period was a challenge. And so all of our surrounding services, including Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire, Royal Berkshire, London, all declared major incidents as well. Resources. But it just goes again. I go back to the crews did a magnificent job, and as I say, we did rely on some mutual aid, but then equally we were going across into other areas as well when they were requesting mutual aid. So it was a very, very busy day for us.
Yeah, and I think it's one that's really important for this committee in terms of us looking at risks. And given what we know from the meteorologists that these kinds of temperatures, we've had 2 days of it. We never got the rainstorm, so it's just a dry outside, so it could repeat today, even though it is cooler, it's still just as dry. So I'm just wondering if in the future, if the chair is amenable, if we might want to have a bit of a deeper dive into this, and particularly how, if there is something that we need to talk to our neighbouring fire services and maybe have right into government collectively to explain, to say, actually, if this is to increase, this is actually what we need to be seeing right across the country. Because you're right, I think the fire service did an amazing job. The Thames Valley Police were there, ambulance, And of course, the council was there
Yeah,
and it was
council
deciding, and it was a really good example of joint working. But it really worried me, given what some of the firefighters were saying about, had we, we wouldn't have been able to cope if there had just been an accident on the M1. We would have fallen over in that period of time.
Just that we did have an accident on the M1 and we did.
Yeah, but do you know what I mean? Like we had another, and it's that, I think that's what we're hearing from fire authorities across the country. So I wonder if this is just an opportunity for us to work together to actually be clear with the government with the rising incidents of this kind of severe weather happening. Actually, we need to be thinking about how we think about the resourcing of our fire services across the country in order to deal with this.
Okay,
Sorry.
you don't have to say anything, Mick's already.
Well, I mean, this is the start of the question.
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
got some thoughts about what you said.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's been minuted. Bill?
Chairman, just as good a place as any, can I just congratulate the fire service for their busyness of yesterday?
Yes.
It wasn't just Boston, it was London. The fire service is the only service that will immediately turn out a fire appliance when the 3 nines come and emergency services. Because of the spiders webs that they work across the country, there will always be a fire engine to turn out as soon as the bells go down. And it's worked very well in the past. Sometimes it's restricted, but the thing is, the experience there sometimes is exceptional. And well, always is exceptional. So it makes up for that. But yesterday was 1 in a million, I think. But can we thank all the teams in Buxton and everywhere for that, for what they did yesterday.
Okay, that's minuted. Thanks, Mick.
Yeah, just seconding what was said. I think it's great to see, not just in Buckingham, all over the country, how the authority have covered and committed, and the way they done the job. It was proud to see. It was a very difficult time, very hot. I think we should acknowledge congratulations for their hard work.
Okay, Robin, this is a question, is it?
Yeah, I just asked for yourself, Chairman, whether we can write to whoever it is got responsibility presently this situation, to ask them to have an early meeting with the fire authorities nationally to consider the outcomes of yesterday, consider it against the resources available, to consider it against the national picture, which is climate change, and the national picture, which is resources have struggled since 2010. So I think we do need to ask them to be senior level meeting to discuss where it is, so we can start planning for this. It won't be 1 in a million. It's going to almost be every year or biannual now. And we can praise them for managing under extreme circumstances and doing an extremely good job and not falling over without additional resources. That cannot always be so. So I think we'd like to propose that we write to the appropriate person, whoever they are now, in the government, and ask them to be senior level fire authorities across the country to actually plan how we're going to plan for the future. If we don't do it, we took the right decision, as we said earlier at the last meeting, to move it up our list of importance on the corporate register. We need them to take the right decision to reciprocate, because these things have a window of opportunity, don't
We
they?
do. Anyway,
If we don't attract their attention now, they'll move on to other things.
anyway, Jason.
Yeah, just to be clear, now the corporate risk management is on there. So I don't want to sort of prejudge or pre-talk about any of them bits. Yesterday was, I've been in the fire and rescue service for 30 years and I've never experienced a day like yesterday. And the point about that corporate risk and the point about how we coped, for the first time in my career, there were services that were genuinely saying, we can't send you anything. We've got nothing left. Now, I'm not trying to worry anybody, but we crossed a bridge yesterday that I've never experienced in my 30 years. And I think there's a broader debate probably to be had when we get to corporate risk management about that point. I've got a lot of views about that and a lot of thoughts, and I'm happy to think of them then if that's helpful.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay, thank you for your observations. Thank you for your praise, Justice. So I think we're really proud of what the organisation, Jason. So can you take it back to your start? Fantastic, and we appreciate
Very
it.
good.
Okay, I believe that's that one, number 8. Right.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. For newer members, this relates to the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, and alongside all the frontline and response responsibilities that we have, we are also an enforcing authority where we undertake investigations into potential breaches in fire safety legislation, and we do have powers to undertake covert surveillance, conservative authority. But in the most recent reporting period, we've been required to sort of those covert surveillance.
Thank you very much. Any observations there? Isn't any? Right. 9A. Page 23. We all got it. Selina Arlen. Good morning to you.
Morning, Chair. Thank you very much. So this first paper I'm presenting is the finalized internal audit report for the asset management system mapping review that we have issued since the last committee meeting. So from the work undertaken by the team, we've made 8 new recommendations to help further improve the control framework relating to the asset management system. I'll hand over to my colleague Alex Prestridge. He's the lead auditor who undertook this work, and he will talk you through the detailed report, which is from pages 25 of your packs.
Okay, thank you,
Morning.
Selina. Thank you, councillors. So just some background on where this piece of work came from. So there was a finding in the 2020-21 asset management system audit that found that some processes weren't documented. So this piece of work was undertaken to map those processes. And we also have a number of recommendations from that work. So first, an introduction of what Red Kite is. So Red Kite's the Fire Authority's equipment management system, and it allows a few things to be done. So there's a hierarchical structure that allows classes of assets to be defined within the system, with types of asset belonging to each class, and then details of every asset of a specific type. So they can be assigned a location, and the location can be moved within the system. So it also has a defect management function, and it allows maintenance and safety checks to be recorded, as well as inventory checks carried out by fire crews, so they can be recorded on handheld scanners as well, which helps to speed up and automate the process. So bulk tasks can be carried out with the system as well. Access rights can be assigned, and reports can be generated on purchase orders and on equipment within the system. So from the piece of work we did, as Selina mentioned, we raised 8 findings. 6 of these were high priority, 2 were medium priority. So you can see these on page 29 of the reports pack. Page 30 gives an overview of the system with the values and volumes held within the system. There are also a number of manual processes that support entry of data into the system, and we documented some of these as well, the key processes. So one of these is a monthly reconciliation that's carried out between Red Kite and Integra. So we raised 2 findings around asset additions. Sorry, 3 high priority findings around asset additions. 1 around defects, so around operational equipment. The system is also used for building defects, property defects. So there were no recommendations raised around disposals. 2 medium priority recommendations raised around inventory checks, and 2 around tests. We also found that the system has a total of 375 users. Some of these seem to no longer be active or no longer be active employees of the fire service. So we've raised a recommendation that these access rights should be reviewed to ensure segregation of duties, integrity of the system and security of assets. So Appendix B within the slides, so we're on page 39 now, is the follow-up findings. So we found that 3 findings from the recent audit reports, so that's 2018-19, 2020-21 audit reports. So 3 of those were fully implemented. The rest have not yet been fully implemented. So I'll pause now for any questions you might have, or if there's anything you think I might have missed. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
Robin.
Firstly, thank you very much for the report and detailing it and the comprehensive nature of it. What I'd like to ask, when you say assets, be that equipment and renewals, I think that's what you said. If I misheard you, I apologise. You mentioned it in the report. How do we calculate what needs replacing immediately? What is going to be have to be budgeted for to be replaced, and what we can share between different stations who may have equipment that may have fallen or out, which equipment wears out, and that's how it is, it's used, it's what it's there for. How do we calculate that risk and make sure that at any point there is adequate equipment for firefighters when they arrive, that they actually have got the equipment they know? I think you mentioned it as equipment shortages, so that's why I'm drawing the conclusion if you looked at it.
Okay.
Can I just, if it's okay, to hand over to Mark Hemming, Director of Finance and Assets, because I think he'll be able to assist with the response to that.
Yeah, so certainly in terms of budgeting, we have a rolling replacement program, so that stuff's replaced kind of according to manufacturer recommendations around life cycle replacements. As we actually look at bottom as well, so some things immediately needs to come off the run. We have a certain amount of capacity to be able to replace those. So we cope with it in that manner. Callum, did you want to add to that?
So in addition to the budgeted planning, we have a Thames Valley R&D group, and also taking feedback from station end. So we have planned cycles of replacement and maintenance of equipment. Certain items have got a lifespan on them, which we want to and budget to. Other items, when technology changes and new more advanced equipment provides a better level of functionality than the kit we've currently got, and we do through our wider R&D. We've had 2 members of staff go to Intershots, international show, the European show, around showcasing the latest newest equipment, from hydraulic rescue equipment all the way up to highway tuner appliances. And that is then fed back in through the R&D group and through the technical department, and then considered to provide best value within our needs and budget constraints.
Question follow up to that, and thank you for the answers, the right answers. When it comes to budgeting going forward, is our budget grown significantly against the equipment, knowing that we've just renewed the respirators and took that decision, and we're now in line with other places, and that was because of the way equipment wears out, that we've replaced it at the appropriate time, not just replaced it, and that was a good thing. Is our budget looking at wear and tear? Is it resilient enough to take us through to the next fiscal year, or is it not resilient enough, and has it grown as a percentage of the overall budget of the authority against the risks and the attributes that we use in the equipment?
Yes, so the budget for kind of the equipment has been fairly consistent year on year. We have a regular rolling replacement program. As Callum says, that with the collaboration, we're able to purchase that more efficiently. they have pointed out that like the breathing apparatus project, that was obviously a one-off spike because then that equipment will then last for 10, 15, 20 years, depending on the actual technology at the time. And as Callum says, it may be that the equipment's still good, there's better technology available. So maybe another spike, we have to replace that, but generally it's been fairly consistent as part of our capital program.
Thank you.
Good. Any other questions? There's not. Can you want to continue?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I'll move on to the next report, which is the annual report. Oh, apologies.
Hold on. We got a minor recommendation.
Right, sorry, yeah. If we just include 9A, which are the recommendations are at page 23, that members know the final reports for financial year 21-22.
All agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Let's move on then. Thank you.
Apologies. Okay, so the next report is the annual audit report, and this report starts from page 47 of your pack. This outlines the internal audit work undertaken by the Internal Audit Service for the year ending 31st of March 22, and this provides an opinion on the adequacy and effectiveness of the control environment, detailing any incidences of significant control failings or weakness. The accounts and audit regulations require the fire authority to maintain an adequate and effective internal audit service in accordance with proper internal audit practices, and CIPFA, the public sector internal audit standards, also set out practices for proper internal audit, which requires the chief internal auditor to provide a written report to those charged with governance. This is also to support the annual governance statements, which should include an opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the fire authority's control environment. The effectiveness of the control environment is achieved through a risk-based plan, or an assessment of the environment is achieved through a risk-based plan of work, which is agreed with senior management and approved by this committee. The public sector internal audit standards define internal audit as an independent objective assurance and consulting activity designed to add value and improve an organization's operation. It helps an organization accomplish its objectives by bringing systematic, disciplined approach to evaluate and improve the effectiveness of risk management, control, and governance processes. It should be noted that internal audit is not responsible for the controls of the systems. The responsibility sits with management, who are accountable for maintaining a sound system of internal control and is responsible for ensuring that adequate arrangements are in place for gaining assurance about the effectiveness of the overall system of internal control. On page 49 of your packs, you will see the Chief Internal Auditor's opinion for the year 2021-22. Based on the audit work undertaken, combined with our experience and knowledge of previous year's performance and the current climate in which the authority is operating in, the Chief Internal Auditor's opinion is reasonable. Whilst the work undertaken for the year has identified areas of further improvement that are required to ensure that the internal control framework remains adequate and effective, our overall findings have not raised or identified any material weaknesses. As such, the Fire Authority has continued to demonstrate a robust and effective internal control and risk management environment. On Appendix 1, which is on page 59 of your packs, this provides details of all the findings that we've raised for the work undertaken during the year. You would have seen all these details as part of the final reports that were presented to the committee throughout the year. Appendix 2, this is providing a status update on the progress that's been made to implement audit actions that have been raised. I'd like to highlight to members that that paper highlights 21 actions overdue. However, since the paper was written, further action has been taken and there are only 14 actions that currently remain as overdue. Finally, I'd like to highlight to yourselves that the Buckinghamshire Council Internal Audit Service team were subject to a quality assessment on conformance to the public sector internal audit standards in Q4. This is a requirement that each internal audit service should be assessed by externally every 5 years, and the conclusion of the review undertaken by CIPFA found that we fully conform to all the requirements set out in the public sector internal audit standards and the CIPFA local government application note. I will pause there and take any questions on the paper.
Robin.
Yeah, thank you very much for the report again and surrounding your details and in it. Of course, when this report was lots of parts of the report put together in 2020, and we're now in 2022. Many things have changed between now, and we've now got a inflationary condition, both in purchase equipment and managing everything, fuel prices and everything else on up. Also, we have a that inflation also impinges on the quality workforce that we have, and the inflation that we're experiencing as an authority is not the inflation that the workforce have. Do you think we need to start looking at how we mitigate, look and plan to do something to the cost of living? The cost of living to the authority and the cost of living to the authority firefighters working just the same. There's no mention in there. When much of this was drafted, we didn't know that we were going to do this, and we were going to go into a cost of living crisis. I think we need to start looking at that. We don't talk about it. We can't plan for any change. People are as important as equipment.
Mark,
So just come back on that, Councillor Statutory. Very important point you've highlighted. I think that's probably more of an external risk, which will pick up under Northern Corporate Risk Management. This is more primarily focused on the internal risks and the environment. So if I may come back on item 11 and address that very important point. Very happy.
Emily.
I just had a question about the light. Obviously, it gives, I mean, the purpose of the light hub, which gives a lot of feedback about things that we could have done differently. Given what we talked about at the away day, of potentially even looking at, you know, closing some stations in Buckinghamshire and amalgamating and I saw your eyebrows go up, but we did talk
No,
about
there's a noise came over the back of here.
right. And creating that. I just don't, have we internally as an authority brought those lessons learned together so that we're assured that if we went with a similar project in the future, we would have the confidence that we were sharing the risks with the other services, we were had contingency, all of those sorts of things that have been pointed out in this report.
Yeah, we've started to do that. So the audit report of the previous committee was the first bring to a future committee a comprehensive report of all the lessons learned for sure. For a similar project in the future, or if indeed other services to do a similar project in the future as well.
Great, thank you.
Robin.
Yeah, we touching on that very base, that what sort of level would that there's been no decision technically taken either one way or another, but we've got to plan how we meet the budget. But that level of report won't be particularly in the direction of travel, I don't think, but particularly what we do. I don't think the authorities taking any decision on those aspects, apart from the fact that we have to consider them as a risk against the total operation. Would that be correct?
Yeah, this report will be a backward-looking evaluation of what happened, what we did against the specification, did we deliver what we set out to deliver. It won't be looking towards what we could do in the future. That will be a separate consideration as part of public safety planning.
I've just got to
Thank you.
Jordan to maybe have.
Thank you. On the questions. Do you want to round up, or is that it's all whatever? Do you want to say any more? Okay.
I think we just take members to recommendation.
Okay. Well, looks like we finished. Recommendation, Graham.
Recommendation is at page 45, and that's the members' note of progress on internal audit.
Read everybody.
Read.
Thank you very much. Right.
Thank you, Chairman. The purpose of this item is to gain approval for the annual governance statement 122 for signature by the Chairman of the Authority, by the Chief Executive, for adoption of the statement of accounts. Annual governance statement. Statement of accounts. As per previous years, it's in the format to reflect the SIPFA Solid Card, and SIPFA being the Chartered Institute for Public Finance and Accountancy, SOLIS being the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives and Senior Managers. Unlike the previous 2 years, when SIPA produced specific guidance on reflecting the impact of COVID on governance, no discrete specific guidance was issued. However, this report still does reflect the impact of COVID on the authority, because it's notable that our pandemic recovery group didn't actually cease to function until the 1st of April 2022. So it very much reflects the impact of COVID on the operation and governance of the organisation. There are 2 appendices. Appendices A, which is the progress of implementation of recommendations against last year's annual governance statement, that's at page 7. And Appendix B starts at page 112. Now members to take themselves through it.
Everybody there?
Yeah.
There's just one addition, 2 areas to be addressed in 2023 that I'd like to propose, having discussed this with Mark Hemming, the Chief Finance Officer, and this is in response to the standing inquiry made by our external auditors in terms of how we monitor fraud and money and allegations of money laundering. So having reviewed the current policies, it was noted that they haven't been reviewed since 2018. So I did circulate a proposed formal wording to members in advance of this meeting. I'm happy to take members through it so it's read into the record. So the proposal is to add another issue to be addressed in 22 and 23 as follows, and that's under the heading of counter fraud and corruption and anti-money laundering policies. The action plan has got a narrative there that both policies were last reviewed in 2018. It would be good practice for these to be reviewed by officers and members of the Overview and Audit Committee during the financial year 22-23, the lead officer being the Director of Finance and Assets, and the target date for conclusion being the 31st of March 2023. Chairman, I don't propose to take members through the annual government statement in detail, but I'm happy to field any questions or ask to colleagues that might be better
Okay.
to answer
Any
questions.
questions?
To agree.
Recommendation, Graham?
Yeah. Recommendations. Just bear with me one moment. Recommendations are page 79. Firstly, that the annual governance statement 21-22 be approved, subject to those conditions that I just brought members through. That the progress on the implementation of recommendations of the previous annual governance statement, which is Appendix A, as I mentioned, be noted, and the priorities again to that proviso that I spoke to members about. 23 be agreed.
Everybody? Thank you for that. Thank you, Graham, for that hard work. Bill, are you okay? You got a drink or anything?
No, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got
If anyone wants to get a drink, you can get a drink in the back. Item 11, Stuart. I believe we've already got a question from Robin. But you don't have to put it again here. Just wait for Stuart.
Thank you. This is the regular report on the status of our corporate risks that we present for every meeting of this committee. The report at pages 113 to 130 of your papers reflects any changes and updates made to the corporate risk register since this committee last reviewed it at its meeting on the 16th of March 2022. Since then, the risk register has been subject to regular review by officers at our performance monitoring and strategic management boards, most recently at the 21st of June SMB, and also by lead members where individual risks fall within their areas of reference. Those are shown in the responsibilities column in the risk register, Appendix 3, pages 1 to 130 of your papers. Appendix 3 also contains the detailed evaluations and updates on the status of the individual corporate risks. I will briefly overview these before referring back to the chairman for any questions or comments that members may have. In doing so, I will also ask the relevant officer risk owners whether they have anything to add to what I have to say in relation to each risk, as some of these are quite fluid at the present time. I will start by drawing your attention to the risk map at Appendix 1, which is page 117. In relation to this, you may have noticed a slight change to the format relative to the one you saw last time. Following feedback from lead members, we've added risk trend indicators, which are the arrows next to each risk. As you can see, although we've not changed any of the risk scores or associated rank statuses since we last reported to you in March, there is upward pressure on two of the risks, so we'll spend most of our time on these. Firstly, in relation to the staff availability risk, there are some positive developments to report, particularly regarding our current campaign to increase numbers of firefighters, which is yielding some significant success. For example, we have 31 candidates approaching the final stages of the recruitment process for whole-time apprentice firefighters. Alongside this, we've received 58 applications in response to our advertising for competent whole-time and on-call firefighters. Risk remains at RAG status due to the continuing risk of loss of existing operational staff to other fire and rescue services, in particular London Fire Brigade, who are still actively recruiting at scale, and difficulties in filling some specialist support roles, such as vehicle technicians and fire workshops. Lastly, we are signalling the upward pressure on the risk score due to the current position in relation to the National Firefighter Pay negotiations. On Monday, the Fire Brigade Union's Executive Council voted unanimously to reject the employer's 2% offer following consultation with its members. Doing so, they signalled their intention to develop their case for a higher settlement, including preparations for strike action. And regarding this, I'll just turn now to Jason, Chief Fire Officer, as I think he might just have a look at that to what I said there in relation to the pay negotiations.
Yes, thank you very much, Stuart. The issue is just picking up on what Stuart just said, a 2% offer was tabled by the employers to the Fire Brigade Union and was rejected unanimously. I think it's important to put into context the rejection of that 2%. In the last 13 years, firefighters have had an increase in 13 years of 13.5% in pay, an average of 1% every year. And so the issue about pay, for firefighters' pay, and I'll talk about control staff and also back office staff as well as we continue, has been building for a number of years. We have issues with recruitment in many ways, in terms of back office. If you look at the issues that we've got, but firefighters, in my view, are falling behind, and our back office staff and control staff are falling behind other public sector workers. I fully expect, unless a renewed offer is tabled, which is of substantial nature, I fully expect there to be industrial action from the Fire Brigade Union this year in September and October. I need to put on record, I'm not a politician, I'm an officer of the service, so I have no real political views. I do have political views, but I keep them very well hidden. So you just got to think, I can only give you the facts. The point about it is that we are hurtling towards, in my view, a firefighter strike. The root cause of that firefighter strike and the root cause of the 13.5% over 13 years is you will be distracted by a number of things. Is it the National Joint Council? Is it local negotiation? Is it national negotiation? The root cause of this is the lack of investment and the ability of fire authorities to pay. This authority will be capped at 2% in terms of council tax and precept rises, and our ability to pay anything above that will mean a reduction in service if pay was to be offered. In my view, firefighters' pay needs to be underwritten by the government. There needs to be a way of funding firefighters' pay fundamentally now and in the future. If you look at control staff, we have the same issues in terms of recruitment. And if you look at the underspend in our budget, you will see the majority of the underspend is attributed to back office staff. We struggle to recruit back office staff, mainly due to pay. This will not change unless pay is underwritten somehow by government. And there's no way around it. So the reason why I fully expect it to be a firefighter strike is because we can only afford to pay 2%. We can't put up council tax to pay for it. and the governments will not fund it at the moment. And that will be the fundamental issue as we move forward.
Thank you. Robin. Yeah.
Thank you for that honest, frank, straightforward reality. I did earlier point to the fact that we have invested in our authority probably for a decade, and I'm very clear that the 13% over that period is not a huge rise in income. As I said earlier, we are in a cost of living crisis which affects all the materials we purchase, plus our most valued asset, which is our workforce. Now, I totally agree that the government should fund this shortfall. I totally agree that they should be implemented. What will be most disappointing about this is in the next 2 to 3 days, we will see lots of people saying, oh, firefighters have done a tremendous job, haven't they done this, whatever, but it's never back to 100% with the enthusiasm budgetary. We have a growing situation in the country where firefighters have probably dropped by, I think the figure was something like 25,000 or something. Massive figure of firefighters since 2000 aren't there in the service. Everybody in the service has done everything possible to make the service function more economically, more efficiently, and whatever. And we've come to a point where two things are pressing on the workforce. The workforce cannot work for nothing, and they can't work hungry. So I understand why they feel as they do. Let's hope that we can write, as I proposed earlier, as a firefighter, asking for an early meeting, as I said earlier, of senior fire officers across the country to actually express the case why this is an extraordinary circumstance and that the government needs to take this seriously. They will be taking this climatic issue that we talked about earlier. This is the time to talk to them, why they're focused on the actual work of the fire department across the country and the work of the fire officers. Without them, let's be clear, if you look what happened in London yesterday, without them things could have been tremendously worse, and they had to call in units from all over the place because of the cuts in resources in the London Fire Brigade. The unit closest to one of the fires wasn't able to be called out, and we saw in Milton Keynes the pressures there yesterday. So it is there, not all about pay, it's about resources, period, and it's about time that they have stepped up to the plate and actually been interested in it, more than wishing to change the way the authority runs.
That, Emily.
So I agree with everything Robin said, and I do thank Jason for his honesty and very fair appraisal of the situation that we're in. I think it's really important for us to understand. I think 9.4% inflation was announced this morning. 2% is actually a pay cut. That means for our fire, for anybody that works in the fire service, and we're already aware that people before this were struggling with household bills, which are of course also going up, especially energy bills. And the last thing we want is to see the same story as we're seeing in some of the hospitals where food banks are being set up in situ. I think I totally understand what you're saying, Jason, and I do understand that this is not just a Bucks and Milton Keynes Fire Authority issue. This is going to be an issue across the country. And this is why I go back to my earlier point that we really need to start coming together as fire authorities on these common issues and giving a very, very clear message to the government, whoever it may be, that this is not sustainable. And when you talk about the fire service, you talk about it costing lives ultimately. And with climate change, meaning that our periods of heat during the summer going up, our periods of flooding during the winter are going to go up. You know, this is really, really serious issues. And I don't think our lone voice will be enough to change minds. I really do think we need to come together as fire authorities across the country.
Bill, something come in and then we'll come back to Jason. Bill?
Yeah, thank you. Jason has given a very clear picture of where we are now. I think what we've heard through the heat yesterday and the day before, the public sector being offered by store a rise in in percentage that is being held maybe in the autumn. I mean, we'll have to wait to see what the result of who will be the new PM. But I think anybody watching the scenery at the moment will realise that 2% is the rise rate and it will have to be changed in the autumn. Whether it will be enough, I don't know, but you know, they were saying yesterday, and I can quite understand this. Once you start chasing inflation, it continues and continues. That's what happened in the 80s for those of us who were around at that time. So I think we hear what Jason says. I'm hoping when we meet again at the next meeting, there might have been something by government.
Basically, want to come back?
Well, I think having been through, well, this may be the third strike I've been through my career, and that every single strike I've been through is always damaging. You can get a narrative of people going on strike, and there can be a narrative created in general about, you know, that people going on strike don't work, but no, that sort of stuff. We don't have that here. There's a different. This service has reduced its whole time workforce, its full-time firefighter workforce by 35% in the decade of austerity. And in that time, we've not reduced the number of fire engines that we've got. And your workforce has stepped up every single time, day in, day out, to cover them shortfalls. So I just want to create that so that there can be a narrative about people going on strike. And yesterday's a prime example. People turning in on leave, off duty, cancelling things, dropping the kids off, getting alternative childcare, all of them things to respond to the issues that we had yesterday in the community, because they're dedicated to their communities. And I wouldn't want people to lose sight of that. The fundamental issue of the fire and rescue service in terms of funding is this argument between it's locally agreed or it's nationally agreed. Fundamental issue is the money is not invested in the fire and rescue service to enable any negotiation to take place about change of role. There is no money invested in terms of pay rises as we move forward. 13.5% over 13 years. That's where we are. And unless there is a change, I was on a watch this morning, funnily enough, because I do pop in and speak to them. And they openly said, we don't want to go on strike. But what choice have we got? 2% for the previous 13 years, 13%. Where do we go from there? I don't know what the answer is, Councillor Chapel. The only answer is, and that broader point about inflation is a well put point. Fire and rescue service is a very, very small sector. And I would suggest if you look at the last 13 years, I don't think anybody in the public sector has had a rise of as low as 13.5% in 13 years. And I think there's a broader argument to be made about fire and rescue service and firefighters. Maybe wrong on that.
Thank you. Robin?
Yeah.
I was rather hoping that Jason summing up was going to be here. So
We have to be honest, don't we?
we've all been honest.
Facts and statistics aren't always honest, and figures given by people to prove a narrative aren't always correct. The reality is that in real terms, listen very carefully to what Jason said. In real terms, we've had an inflationary cut to fire service wages. In real terms, we've had an inflationary downgrading financially over a long period of time. The reality of that is I don't buy into the argument that suddenly replacing bringing forth what should have been put in place in the first place. And I still echo the point that our strongest resource is our workforce. Without our workforce, we can't do what we did yesterday. We can't do what we did going forward. And we have all these historical arguments around what happened in the 80s happened in the 70s. We're actually not in either one of those now. We're in an extremely difficult situation. That now we have a global issue, which showed us yesterday, that's global warming. Let's not be unclear about that. And we've got a workforce which has worked hard to be reasonable in that period of time. Cost of living crisis is something that we didn't plan for or ascertain would be as big as it's going to be. All that's going to depend on it. We can't, as Emily said, we can't have our who've got to support family and children, and as you said, take them to school, turn out, drop a job, do whatever, and turn up at whatever. We've outside here today, we've got people who were on a training course yesterday who couldn't go to their training course because they had to better into the whole service in the country to make sure we filled in gaps. They do where they're up. So let's hope, and I propose here that we agree to recommend that we write to whoever it is after the so-called affairs are finished in using 10 Downing Street, and that we actually get someone to actually sit at this and do it properly, because at the moment it's the right time to talk about it, not in 2 weeks to 4 weeks time when the spectrum moves on to the next problem in the country. Yesterday, the forest authorities up and down the country pulled every stop out to protect people in this country, and as Emily said, it's about lives, and they're doing that on a day-to-day basis. So I think we do need to agree that we would push the senior levels of the firefighters across management across the country to meet with whoever it is to discuss this problem at the earliest. As Jason said, we're heading towards industrial action, and we should try to get the government to step in, do the right thing, and to remediate the cost of living crisis within the service. And I think if we don't do that, we would be negligent. What the government does, we can't control. We're only councillors and only and the point where we can advise them what's best thing to do.
Jason, briefly.
Yeah, I can, if members of this committee are happy, I can draft a cross-party letter about the facts on pay rises the last 30 years. They're not spin, they are facts. And I can include them, and I can draft a letter about the need to fund a proper pay rise for fire staff, and that's not just firefighters, it's control staff, that's back office staff as well. If members are happy with that, I'll obviously circulate that for comments.
Yeah, you're looking at comments. Okay, well, thanks for that nice suggestion. Good suggestion, and I think it's the right suggestion. Thank you for that. Stuart.
Thank you. Well, I'll just turn us now to the financial risk.
So before we move on, have we agreed that? If you moved on,
Yeah.
we never voted on it. We
Well-
moved on, but that is agreed.
Well, Jason came out with a comment, and I think we generally agreed on that, didn't we? Yes.
Yes, agree.
And once again, Jason, thank you for being really upfront about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Stuart.
Okay, thanks. So I'm just turning us obviously to the financial. We've also been talking about aspects of already. That's detailed at pages 123 to 124. You'll see that we've not raised the risk score on ag status at this point, but we have signalled upward pressure on this risk. And that's obviously due to things like the significant inflationary pressures that we are facing in relation to things like fuel and energy costs, and also the potential, of course, for a higher than budgeted outcome to the annual staff pay settlement. When the budget was set for this year back in February, the provision obviously was a 2% settlement. Just for information, the incremental cost of every additional 1% is £200,000 per annum. So that gives you the sort of impact that it would have on our finances. And alongside this,
So can you repeat that, please?
sorry, yeah, for every 1% additional increase in pay is it costs us about £200,000 per annum. It's a big impact. And alongside that, we've also got some continuing uncertainty around some of the other funding streams that we have from central government for things like USAR, for example, and there's also issues with things like airway funding as well. So there are a lot of risk areas there. Just switching back to the energy price rises, one other thing to mention there is it's not just about price, it's also about continuity of supply. And you may be aware that Gazprom, they're basically the Nord Stream 1 pipeline into Germany is currently offline of planned maintenance. Now, tomorrow, is the last day of that, theoretically, of that maintenance, and then obviously after that it should be supposedly switched back on. There's a lot of doubt about that, and Gazprom have already invoked their force majeure provisions in their supply contracts. And obviously it's right across the continent. And of course, this can have a knock-on effect to us, because of course what happens in Europe during the summer is they fill up the gas reservoirs ready for winter. At the moment, they can't do that, and so obviously Russia is using this obviously as retaliation to the economic sanctions and to put pressure on us. And of course, that it's not just about the gas that goes into people's homes. Of course, a lot of our electricity is also gas power as well. So there are obviously risks as we enter the autumn and winter period. Not beyond the bounds of possibility that there could be discontinuities of supply. That's something obviously that we do look at, and something that we exercise in relation to the LRF and so forth. But just wanted to just put that out there. I'll just ask Mark whether there's anything you'd like to pick up on at all in relation to this broad area.
Yeah, I think what you said, try and tie some of the debates we've been having earlier around inflation together, was in terms of the workforce cuts, as kind of yourself and Jason said, we have had massive cuts over the last number of years. Last year, we started to reverse that trend. So members approved the £5 increase in capital tax. We put an extra 20 whole-time staff in our establishment. The inflation pressure is now threatening that. What we really need to do is we're fighting to get the extra funding so we can keep those extra staff. The pressure's now changed slightly. So even if we were to get that £5 increase again, that option, £5 is about 7%. So it's still be below inflation increase. As part of my national role, I am surveying all fire and rescue services to say what are your inflationary pressures, and we're pulling that together to put to government. So Fire Home Office to Treasury to say this is the inflation pressure against the service. If you do not fund this, you will lose X number of firefighters. Because that's the only way we've got of averting that inflationary pressure is to reduce staffing more or less, because that's where 70% of our cost is.
Robin,
No, Emily, go.
So, I think that work that you're doing, Mark, is really, really important. I'd be really interested in you sharing that with the committee, if that's not possible. Once it's completed, because I think that's really important. And I just wanted to pick up on Bill's point about inflationary increases in the public sector is chasing inflation. Well, unfortunately, what we're seeing, and the reason we can't keep people in the public sector is we've taken a huge chunk out of our workforce nationally because of Brexit, and then the private sector are putting up inflationary. So why wouldn't you go and work there if that meant you wouldn't have to rely on a food bank? So I think we've got to be honest and say the people that got us through the pandemic, those people in the public sector, need to be recognised now as the essential workers that they are for our country.
Thank you. I think it's important when we talk about this. It's always attractive for a headline, possible strike action. It always draws narratives negative about the workforce. I think we need to put out there the actual realities that during COVID, our firefighters and the team here, what they went beyond what was normally expected of people, worked to supplemented the NHS, police and everybody else, and effectively work with them. I think we need to get those facts out into the open about how diverse and how important role that they did. It wasn't talked about very greatly, and it's always an easy one. You can say public service wages shouldn't go up. Well, they haven't gone up for a decade, and in any significant way. Well, you've got a situation where it's probably more cost effective.
we got a question here.
Well, yeah, I will be affected. Don't worry about it. When it gets to a situation that we can't compete with as a firm or an organisation with other organisations in the private sector for skilled workforce, how do we address that? We can't address that presently. I think the evidence says so. I'd like to find out how we can address that without taking out the worries me listening to Mark say that we may take after the only thing we do take out workforce, because that's the very thing that we're here for. and that is a disaster. So how do we address that? Can we have some paperwork to us about, before anything happens, on all these things we've done, which I need to know what we did during the pandemic. I need to know what the cost of the authority would be in terms of service provision with the loss of the workforce, if that was the only means we could meet an additional inflation. I listened very carefully to Stuart's candid words around the pipeline, and I think we need to be really clear that if, as Stuart candidly and very sensibly put it, that we have no gas, and then emergency services are just as vulnerable as anybody else. And can we at least try to get a high level briefing from government what they expect it to be? As Stuart said, we fill tanks up in the summer for the winter. We're not filling them up. Also, the oil's been going off stream for some time, and we could hit a situation, mentioning whatever, the only time I can ever remember a situation close to it was when we had electric turn off for several days, which was in the 70s, and you only had it on for 3 days, and went down to a 3-day week. I thought the 3-day week was a gift to get seeing my dad. I didn't hold a child. I didn't know how serious it was, but I do think we need to actually quantify that and plan and see what we can do, if anything at all, to mitigate, whether it's find some other source of fuel, being gas, whether we can ask whether the government's going to prioritise emergency services with gas supply, or whether they're going to have to compete in the market for energy and fuel costs against everybody else. Because if you remember the fuel crisis years ago, the government did, the previous government took the decision to allow key workers, when there was a problem over fuel, access to fuel. And I think we need to ask all those questions. We need to keep the team going forward. Those are the 6 sections of questions in there, and they are many, but they are important. The office have mentioned these things, and we should know.
Yeah, I think there were comments, by the way.
No, they were not comments. There was a
Those
question
comments,
there.
and Mark, you've taken on those questions.
Yeah, I think in terms of the question around how we're planning, obviously that's part of the budget. As
Yeah.
Stuart said, a lot of this is very fluid around inflation, energy prices, peaks and troughs. So that will become clearer over the next 3 to 4 months as we move towards the budget approval in February. So also we'll keep members abreast of those issues as we work towards that. And there may be some difficult decisions, there may be some good news. At the moment, we just don't know which way it's going to go, but obviously that'll be members' choice as to how you shape the service going forwards.
What a question that you need to ask straight away is that we ask what strategy the government's got about key worker industries in the country when there's like to be a shortage of fuel, because we need to know that we can actually.
Okay, well, we've asked the questions, and that's going to be later on. Mark, you've concluded with that, have you?
Yeah, I can't answer that question
No,
now.
no.
I will go away and I will seek that
Okay.
reassurance that, as you say, when there's a fuel crisis, they prioritised us for fuel. I'll ask the same question around gas and electric supplies.
Good morning, Rex.
Good morning.
You've got a question?
Yeah, so it's sort of by choice. This authority has the lowest precept, or close to it, the lowest precept of any of the authorities in the country. So, and other authorities are very, very significantly higher precepts than ours. And so it's not a level playing field. Does it work to our advantage, or does it work to our disadvantage? When Jason was talking about trying to get the government to come and influence. And the fact that we are one of the cheapest authorities, so it isn't a level playing field, but arguably a government response would be one size fits all.
As you say, it is a very different playing field across different services. So you've got not only different precepts, but then also different council tax bases. So you might have some local authorities that got a small precept but big council tax base, but you might have some authorities that got massive precepts, but a lot of their council tax homes are in bands A to B, so they don't generate as much as others. In terms of the absolute precept level, ours is the second lowest. Last year that worked to our advantage because the £5 flexibility was only offered to those in the lowest quartile. which we've obviously won. So it works to our advantage in that respect. There's pros and cons, swings and roundabouts. So when they're cutting grants, if more of your income from council tax, that's positive. If you're restricted on council tax and they're increasing grants, you want to be the other way around. So there's no straightforward answer. It's a very blended approach to that question, unfortunately.
Thank you. Stuart.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just cover the remaining risks where the position is perhaps a little more stable, just a little. So I'll only cover these in brief. So regarding the information security risk, this is one where we remain particularly vigilant, as I would expect. And it's one of those things where you probably have to work hard just to stand still, given that the offence is always sort of ahead of the defence, as it were. But you will have seen from the updated page 126 that our email security ranking against the rather sacred. I'll spell this out in full if I can find it for you.
The South East Government Warning Advisory and Reporting Point.
That's the one.
It's our new favourite.
So anyway, they have security rankings, various sort of security criteria that they look at. And we've actually increased or rather improved against those criteria thanks to the additional measures that our ICT team have taken. And actually, it's actually quite important because, as you probably appreciate, email is one of the major avenues that hackers use to get into systems, and you know, using techniques like phishing and whatever. So it's quite important to work on. And I'll perhaps just ask Graham if he's got anything more you want to add on that one.
Only to say that one has to be slightly circumspect about what we say in terms of this risk, particularly in terms of the field of cyber risk, because we don't want to put time by putting it to the public domain certain vulnerabilities. Stuart's mentioned SegWarp, so through SegWarp and also through the Home Office, we are plugged in to the national picture. There are a lot of malign actors out there, some of whom are state sponsored, and we are aware that local authorities have been targeted, including foreign risk authorities. So it is, although Stuart said to preface it by saying it's quite a stable risk, it's also a risk that's constantly, it's very, very dynamic, but it's something that demands sort of external vigilance really in terms of staying ahead of the different risks and the dynamic nature, and with the state-sponsored inputs as well.
Thank you, Graham. Regarding the COVID resurgence risk at pages 127 to 128, you've obviously seen this has been rising back up the news agenda a bit recently with increased infection rates nationally. And we do know that locally that is putting some pressure on hospitals as well, and so forth. As far as we can tell at the moment, it doesn't seem to be presenting quite the same sort of potent risk to life as some of the earlier strains of the virus. But of course, we're in summer and we don't know what's going to happen as we move into autumn and winter. So it's one where we monitor the situation very closely, obviously, and obviously work with and draw on intelligence provided by our health agency partners through the LRF and so forth. So we're quite well plugged into all of that. In terms of its impact on our own staff, we've currently got, the last figure I saw was 4.7% reported sick due to COVID. Just for comparison, the figure for all other causes is around 5%. So just give you a bit of a feel for that. And I know my colleague Anne Stummels on the line as well, if you have any questions in relation to that one. So that's COVID. Again, just a kind of a very much a watching on that. The last, the latest position in relation to sergeant pensions risks. I don't have anything much more to say beyond what is there on that particular one, although we obviously again monitor that on an ongoing basis. I don't know, Mark, whether you wanted to add anything further to add on that one.
No, there's probably nothing to add significantly at this stage. We continue to process all the cases that are forward to us in terms of immediate detriment, as is the adopted position of the file authority.
So that covers what's on the record. So I'll now stop there and hand back to the chairman for any more questions or comments that members may have.
Questions, anybody?
Just would like to reiterate my earlier point of ensuring that we understand that we're properly reflecting the impact of climate change in our corporate risk register. I know we have a strategy.
Yeah.
And I know we decided not to put it on the register, but I think given the events, I still think it's the right thing for us to do.
Right. Solves that one. Yeah. So in fact, obviously what you're seeing here is the very, the top bit of the risk pyramid that we have. And in fact, below that are directorate level risk registers, which hold the vast bulk of those, and they cover a great range of different things. And in fact, climate change is on there. It's in our prevention, response and resilience risk register. And that's around the risk essentially around our, because obviously what we're looking at here is potential for service failure in essence. So it's around that the risk is characterised as failure to protect people from risks associated with climate change. If we are unmitigated, that's a red risk. Clearly. Now at the moment, notwithstanding the stress testing that we've just seen over the last couple of days, net of the mitigations that we currently have in place, our view is that risk for now is green, net of those treatments. However, obviously we have the last 2 days, exceptional as they may have been, we have to deal with the unexpected and the exceptional as a service. If we don't, who else will? So obviously what will happen is obviously one, we will revisit that score. I'll work with the area commander that's responsible for that particular risk register, Simon Tuffley, my colleague Simon Tuffley. There are other ways in which we will look at it. Those big incidents that we had yesterday, they will be the subject of reviews, and there will be reports fed into our operation. Will be undertaken by our operational assurance team, that we looked at by our operational assurance group. We can't look at Callum because he chairs that particular group, and so has a big hand in that process. And what will then happen is that if any immediate learning that we get from the way those incidents were handled, any immediate requirements coming out of it, those are then fed into our operational assurance improvement plan. So we do respond quite quickly. And, if there are things there that we say, hang on a minute, there's some serious shortcomings here, we have the means to be able to recognise those and to obviously prioritise them for action. So that kind of deals with it at an operational and tactical level. There's then the bigger question, the more strategic question, which I think is more properly the realm of our next, of the public safety plan and our integrated risk management planning activity. So obviously we do have a range of things that we're doing.
Councillor Darcy make a very good point about that. So we got the obviously climate change. Now, the thing we have to sort of bring together is when we're planning, we plan on service level and look regionally and nationally. And yesterday was the first time, like I said, in my 30-year career, where on a regional, not just regional as in southeast, but eastern, northern bound, the South Midlands region, for the first time ever in terms of how stretched the fire and rescue service was. And we've never come across that before. And I suppose, and one of the things when we're considering on the risk register is actually you can brush it aside if you want to say that was a one-off. It'll never happen again. You can take that view, or you could take the view, actually it's happened to us once. It's reasonably foreseeable for us to happen again. And I think that's the broad point, which links into the resources piece, which links into other pieces in terms of integrated risk management planning, and also Stuart's point about reviewing the risk register following yesterday is actually we need a broader debate about if it's reasonably foreseeable, because we've experienced it once, then we need to be able to step up to that reasonably foreseeable risk, even if it only happens once or twice or 3 times a year in the future. So your point is well made, and from yesterday we will review that corporate risk register based upon what Stuart's just said and bring forward recommendations and thoughts.
So one of those recommendations may be for this committee of the board to start to see that. Because I appreciate what you're doing, it's just that we have no visibility.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's the point, because like I said, it's easy to say, oh, it's a once in a lifetime, once in 20, once in 30. You can say that, and there are people who will say them things, but actually we plan for risk, we plan for demand, what happens, and we also plan for what might happen. We now have experience on a regional countrywide view, actually, for the work services of North Yorkshire who declared major incidents. We now have experience across the fire and rescue service, actually, of a different level. And that's what we need to include in the next stretch.
Just, if I could just finally say, I appreciate that you say, some people may say it's a one-off, but if we follow the science, they are very clear that this will become more regular part of our summer, as well as the increased flooding in the winter will become more of a regular part of our winters. So I hear what you're saying. This is a great one to, it's almost like a warning for us, isn't it? Because if we are going to see increased incidents of these weather activities, actually, we can take a lot of learning from yesterday and say, how do we make sure that we're ready when we start to see these periods of weather extend for a month, or whatever they might end up to.
And not just at a service level, or a regional level, or a national level.
Exactly.
So just to finally, on relation to the point about foreseeable risk, the government's own national framework for fire and rescue services sets the strategic direction and the requirements of things like our integrated risk management plan requires us to identify all foreseeable risks and evaluate them and obviously mitigate against them. So that's also another lever, as it were, in particular review.
Okay, any other questions? Look at this one. Nick, you come in first. Sorry,
No, sorry.
Might be adding to the chief's statement.
It was just on that bit around the climate piece and the wildfires, but there is a lot of data out there. And yesterday, because we did declare a major incident, what was set up was called a strategic coordinating group, where we had all the other partners involved, including local authorities. There were some partners that couldn't make it, which was a bit disappointing. But just on some of that, some of the questions that have been raised and looked at, especially from the Met Office perspective, and how we move forward, isn't just about how we respond, but how we manage the land. You know, so there's a much broader piece on all of this that impacts on us as fire and rescue services. Looking at, we can learn from other countries on that as well. So that was one of the things I took from that yesterday. There's a lot of work that we need to do in the background associated with this particular risk around mitigation, and we can move that forward. So it's not something that, you know, we don't. It was, even though yesterday was a one-off event in itself because it hadn't happened before, the expectation is that it isn't a one-off, and there was no surprises around the table, the virtual table, that following the two hottest days we've ever seen, that we were stretched as we were across the country and the region. So just to give you that assurance that those conversations are being had, and so that strategic coordinating group stood up, and it's still stood up at the moment. Probably going to stand it down today, hopefully. But we're going to move on. We've got a meeting after this but it's just that broader piece as well that will impact upon that business.
Yeah, thank you. Take the decision. Policy that we were going to move into it. It won't follow to that decision back to the next call. It's going to come back there and then come back, but I'm pleased to do it this morning. It's better than the office working. One thing which we do know is happening for easy men. We run through a really dry period in 2007 when the grounds are hard as concrete now. Trouble with that, given its agricultural background, is that every drop of rain that falls on it can't go into it, and what happens is it goes straight into the water. So even a moderately high rainfall can magnitude into a flooding situation because the ground won't take the water. So we have to be wary that at the end of this cycle of heat, we'll have a cycle of rain, and it might not. In 2007, it was in July, and straight after a heat wave, massive active festival out of the park. But that can happen to those things, and I hope to have a note of when we have a note sent to us, all of us, to say what happened yesterday, how we dealt with, just, you know, so we can at least feel part of the story. There, thank you. And going back to the COVID situation, mentioned. Moment we know that the trajectory is going up, we don't know. We haven't had a start. We haven't had one of the three amigos on the telly for a long time. With giving us a brief of what science is, whatever. There's been no notable government briefing on COVID in the same way as we did in the height of the pandemic. We still are in the pandemic because it hasn't gone away. So I have no real way of quantifying risk, and even as an individual, because there may be statistics published on different bases. I hope we're seeing them, but I'm not aware they are. I'm had to visit A&E with the other day, and I sat there talking to the staff at A&E, and it's very much still a pressure within the hospital. So that isn't done there. Is there any stats which we've been given about national trends in it? Because only in your personal life you hear of people who are wild off with the COVID, and it seems to be part of the way we live our lives. But with that, vulnerable people are still at risk. Have we been given any
Okay.
level
I think
around this?
Robin's looking at information, present information.
For COVID, yes, we do. There's things on national government website, and we still continue to have update calls every Monday morning on a local basis to see where we're up to in terms of trends. But yeah, we come together and look at trends that they use off sick, etc. And we pick up the stats from the national government website.
Yeah, but we haven't had a full documented briefing about it for so long. Yeah. So it would be a deliberate thing, and I think the public need that.
Yeah, the Office for National Statistics does produce a range of data in relation to this, so that's available.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you. You finished?
I am indeed.
Recommendations, pages 113. Firstly, the status on identified corporate risks and exceeding reviewed and approved. Secondly, the comments to be provided to officers for consideration and attention, future updates and reports from the certainly reflecting the yes from Councillor Darlington, Chief, and the corporate planning manager in respect to.
Agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Right. Marcus.
Thank you. Good morning, members and officers. Today I present to you with the Treasury Management Report for 21-22. The accrued interest earned for the financial year was 42k, which is 12k higher than the budget set for the same period. Therefore, the authority achieved the budget for the year. In terms of investments, as at the 31st of March 2022, the authority had 16.6 million invested in various counterparties, including banks, building societies, money market funds, and current accounts. There was an action that I took at the last meeting, which was to include the credit ratings against all the counterparties that I had at the time. I've now included that in the report, and that is on page 133 of the report. And also 134 is the definitions of the rating there as well. In terms of borrowing, in May 2022, we paid off a maturing loan that equated to 620,000, and it had no impact on the revenue budgets. In terms of the actual budgets itself, since the last meeting, the Monetary Policy Committee increased interest rates 3 times, 0.75% in March, 1% in May, and most recently to 1.25% in June. Obviously, they're not at the levels of the inflation, as a small increase there. The next review date of this is in August 2022. When we set the budget for 22-23, we kept it at 30k, as there was several deals that were made before December 2021, which was when the first 5 base rate increases occurred. But we have looked into increasing the budget for 23-24, and as it stands, we are projected to increase that up to 100k, so that's a 30k increase. It's quite a significant increase, but it's not up to levels it was previously of 150k a couple of years ago. So we are working towards bringing the budget back up. That 100K is equivalent to 2 firefighters. So that's how we kind of work out the income basis on that. Right? In terms of the benchmarking table on page 137, you can see as at the end of March, the interest rate that we're earning was below the base rate there as well. That trend obviously includes the two increases that happened in May and June as well, which are higher. But for 22-23, we'll achieve the interest of 30K. And like I said, we're going to increase it in future years. Since April, which is not noted in the report, we have made 2 sustainable deposits in one bank, which will be up to 365 days, and they were a good rate, just nearly 2% rate, so way above the base rate as it is now. The final point is that we will continue to monitor the cash flow on a regular basis to ensure the authority can meet the short-term intervention requirements and maintain adequate liquidity. I'm going to pause there for any questions you may have.
Any questions? None? Yeah, very well. Yes, excellent. No. Marcus, you okay?
That's it for me. Recommendations at page 131 that the Treasury Management Performance 21-22 be noted.
Agreed. Right. Anne-Marie. Item 13.
Thank you. Following our second Her Majesty's HMIC FRS inspection, which took place in mid-2021, we completed an action plan. This is the first update since the action plan was originally presented. The survey is making progress against the action plan, with the change since the last period being 2 more items have started and are on track, and 1 new item has moved to being on hold / delayed. Our key focus at the moment is around the 2 causes of concerns which relate to prevention and EDI. Our prevention improvement plan that feeds the HMIC FRS plan is being presented today and shows the progress that's being made. I don't plan to cover that in detail right now, but I'll provide more detail in the next update. At the Fire Authority meeting on the 25th of June, the EDI objectives Year 2 update was presented. This shows the achievements in Year 2 and also the objectives for the coming year. Some highlights to capture there of the service achieved the Ministry of Defence Employer Recognition Scheme Silver Award, and we've most recently found out that we've been awarded the Gold Award. Moved on from there.
Wow.
Good news.
Well done.
We've been supporting with fire and wellness referrals from sponsored households who applied to house and frame families seeking refuge, so they are safe when in the properties that they're being located. And we continue to work from our employee culture survey, which had a great take up of 75% of employees completing the survey, and we're utilising both the responses and the free text to understand how our employees feel. Each service is allocated a member of the HMIC FRS team as a service liaison lead. Ours is Catherine Richardson, and we continue to meet with her regularly and share evidence of our progress being made. Our focus for the next quarter is to build our evidence pack and complete the actions in preparations for a mini re-inspection in late autumn. Thank you for your time. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Robin?
Really, thank you for lots of things that you're doing and pointing us in the right direction. Should know the job and that you're really, and that's important. There's really big red lines in there. Okay, but thank you.
Thank you.
Pass the thanks on to the team as well.
Yeah, thanks again. Ralph.
Thanks, John. It's great to see that the plan and there's clearly evidence of progress in addressing the areas of concern and the recommendations, areas of improvement, etc. To what extent can you give an assurance that the plan, if it's delivered, will result in the mini inspection, confirming the fact we've made progress and effectively we're out of special measures, if I can paraphrase that.
Yeah.
That term. So it's all good stuff, but we want to know it's going to deliver a change rating from the inspector.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We continue when we liaise with Catherine, our service liaison lead, we continue to share what we're doing and also feedback to say Is this heading in the right direction? Is there anything you'd like to see more of, less of? So the assurance we're getting is that we are heading in the right direction from that perspective as well. So I'm relatively comfortable, subject to, no, I'm comfortable for the re-inspection. But I said when we go into round 3 of inspection next year, if measures change and they're looking at different things, we don't know what they're looking at yet, so we can't make that call. But yeah, I'm comfortable that we need the re-inspection.
Provided the goalposts up.
Yeah, I'm hoping they're not. I don't know whether Jason wanted to come in conversations with.
So it's also the timing of the next inspection as well in terms of the transferee. I mean, if we could be in a position whereby we go into industrial action and then we come out of industrial action and then we're inspected. You can imagine when they do the people pillar at that point, how morale will be. So it's one of them. But in general terms, we had a meeting last week with the chairman of the authority and Matt Parr. And we went through and discussed these very issues. And he gave the feedback. He was comfortable where we were and we were making good progress.
Thank you. Okay, recommendation?
Thank you, Chairman. Recommendation at page 139, that the committee note the updated HMIC BFRS improvement plan made.
Agreed. Okay, thank you for that. Item 14, again, Anne-Marie.
So yeah, Simon Tuffley is our course today, so I'm picking up this paper. So this paper is to present the first prevention improvement plan updates since the evaluation reports and improvement plans presented to members in November 2021. In summary, work to address the HMIC prevention cause of concern is prioritised over other areas within the prevention improvement plan. Although the highlight reports and dashboard demonstrate the work is also progressing in most other areas. The highlight report demonstrates that 7 recommendations have been completed, although some significant recruitment initiatives to fill vacancies within the team have effective progress against some of the delivery periods originally identified. Some of the key updates to highlight are a revised prevention strategy has been drafted and it's going through initial consultation with core teams. This strategy will now progress through consultation process for final approval and then up through our governance process. A new station planning process is introduced, which utilises the local risk information provided for Z service delivery areas, embedded model reports and local area profiles. So every station now gets a pack that talks about their local area and they can see by different areas what the different. So that helps them plan their response and their prevention work based on actual risk rather than looking at it across the whole service. External board attendance has been reviewed, ensuring that all external boards where the service is listed as a statutory agency are attended, along with those strategic boards relevant to the service's sphere of influence. And finally, station level communication of prevention activity has improved as the use of prevention notice boards and regular meetings have been introduced to provide support and focused on delivery against key prevention objectives. If you go around our stations now, you'll be able to see prevention boards that are continually updated with relevant information. In terms of risk, the primary objective over the last period has to ensure capacity in the prevention team to deliver our objectives. There have been significant recruitment activity, which is progressing well. There is now only 1 vacancy and the team are receiving appropriate training to build their roles. I'm happy to take any questions and in the absence of Simon, we'll assure any technical questions.
Yes. Lobby and Ralph.
Just a question around the mention that just previously mirroring subject about staff retention and comments made adequately that we Mark made comments that we'd actually step forward in recruiting earlier in the previous report and change the problem going in that we like that we have with management about replacing staff pressures may go the other way that we can't replace those staff. We have a little pit went forward, maybe going back. How are we going to manage that in the long run? Is there any trends next to this based on the limited evidence out there? How we're going to retain our staff against the known problems? Endlessly recruit from other places, other jobs pay better money, and people can't work things.
Yeah, Nick. I can pick up on some of that. Yeah, recruitment and retention is a real issue for us. We're focusing on specific areas at the moment because we want to raise our establishment, so we're looking at that whole piece. But with regard to the prevention, do you want to sort of just focus on the prevention area of this, or
maybe the prevention area and maybe prevention area, which is a slightly different question, is that pressures ratcheted up somewhat since we last looked at these things. In any great detail, the situation's changed.
in broad recruitment and retention, from our firefighter recruitment perspective, you heard earlier, we've had some success there. We've had quite a lot of success recently. We've got a new course starting in October of 18 firefighters. We've got another 11 on hold March next year, and we'll be going out again. And we've had 58 people apply to transfer from other fire rescue services to us. So there is some positive stuff there. But where we are struggling, and we don't be struggling, is in some of those sport-specific specialist roles where we are in competition with others. And we have had quite a turnover of staff in the prevention area in the last 6 months. So that's been an issue. But as Marie put out, we've got one vacancy now within prevention. So it does take a while for that to filter through the system, to come up to speed and to get the right training and the right courses and everything else to be able to put that back to our community. So it is a massive focus for us. And I had a meeting last week with the new members from people, taking through, sort of the whole piece around the recruitment aspects and how we've been focusing on that by setting up a recruitment oversight board. And we've also got a workforce planning group now. Sole focus and task is around recruitment retention and looking at what packages that we do offer and how we can incentivize that and actually attract staff. And we've had a lot of engagement events just recently as well, where we've been engaging across the piece at all levels of the organisation as well, not just with firefighters, but just to encourage people to have conversations with us. And we had a brilliant event just a couple of weekends ago down in Wigan, where we attended the Eid Festival as well. A real lot of interest. And I know the Chief Officer attended that as well. Become a bit of a celebrity, I understand. But we've done an awful lot of an awful lot of engagement and almost marketing, if you like, of the organisation. And it's starting to filter through. So I don't know if Anne did want to come in on any of that. I know Anne's been involved in an awful lot of the kind of in aspects of the organisation, but there's an awful lot of work going on.
Okay.
Thank you, Mick. Can I just say, kind of add a few words to that? So you covered quite a lot of what I was going to say as well, but we've got lots of ongoing events, on-call awareness evenings. We've got Pride event that we're planning for at the minute on the 10th of September. And in terms of the transferees, as Mick said, we had 58 transferees. So we've got 7 internal candidates that we're interviewing on Monday for a September start. And then the external candidates, we're looking for them to be interviewed in the next couple of weeks for kind of November, December. So we're still trying to confirm that information. And I think Mick covered everything else. Were there any other questions?
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ralph, you had another question?
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. The point about having local risk assessments on prevention seems like progress. So the staff are focusing on what the challenges are in the area covered by the station. That sounds to be a great thing. On just hearing you say that now, I read it in the report and thought that sounds good. But my thought was when, in terms of the operating model that the service has, when stations and crews are moved around to provide the resilience that we have when you've got vehicles trucks out on call, how does that interface with the local risk assessment? Is there any need for cross training or backfilling to make that work?
So the benefit is that this has actually been documented. So previously it used to be based on where you've gone and done a site-specific risk assessment in that area, so you know your local ground because you travel to those places a number of times. What we try to do is document some of that, so that you're going up at that station, you can have a read of the pack and understand what's going on. I suppose there is something around, as they attend an incident, they are presented with risk information on an MDT, so the mobile data terminal that's in all the appliances, that gives them that real time and most latest risk information about that. So some of it is a little bit more dynamic alongside a longer term education piece of things.
Yeah, and I think specifically around the prevention elements as well, that local knowledge, that local intelligence of the risk. That's the prevention department provides that overarching element to that. So the crews will go with a toolkit, if you like, to be able to go to a specific premises or address and know probably what they're going to be faced with, but they can adapt with whatever they've got with them. But the sort of the overarching element of how that information is provided is through the prevention department, so you get that consistency. So even though we understand that we do have fairly busy workforces, they are moving around, that people can turn up and the information is readily available where it's been documented. So if it's risk information with regard to an incident, it will be on the mobile data terminal. With regard to if they're going to be doing a prevention visit or a safe and well or fire and wellness visit, that information will be documented there for them. That's all controlled centrally. But that's kind of how we're trying to adapt. So it's a work in progress. It's still not to the end, but it is all taken into account. I hope that.
Brilliant. Rex.
One comment brought my attention there. You say 58 transferred from other fire and rescue services.
Applications.
Applicants. I was going to say, so where do they come from? We always complain about the London Fire Brigade are acquiring our trained staff. So if these people transferring or would have to likely transfer from other organisations, where are they coming from? And is it not a bit two-faced to say, oh, they're taking all of ours, but it's fine for us to take somebody else's?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes.
Yeah, just on that. So it was a slightly different approach to what London done. So London, there's only a specific type of firefighter London wanted, and they were competent whole-time firefighters, generally drivers or with other specialist skills. Whereas for us, we went out for competent firefighters. So what that means is, if we've got surrounding services where they have competent on-call firefighters that might want to become full-time firefighters, then they were eligible to apply. And equally, there are other fire services out there, for instance, the Ministry of Defence and Airport Fire Services, that again have competent firefighters that may wish to join local authority fire and rescue services to put something back in the community. So we opened it up more broadly rather than kind of poaching from just our neighbours. But equally, we occasionally lose a firefighter across the border to maybe Bedfordshire because that's where they live. So it did open the door for people that may live in Buckinghamshire but belong to fire and rescue services. But we've not gone out with sort of like a shake hello type approach. Come and join us and we'll pay you more, etc., etc. This has been a more broad approach, and actually we've had a number of applications from different fire and rescue services with on-call staff, but we did also have skills with, so we can work out what the skills gap is. So we can then tailor a course to meet those individual needs where they've got skills gaps. So it wasn't quite as hawkish as some other fire and rescue services in that respect.
It did. Thank you very much. Okay, I think there's no more questions, Graham.
Recommendation to page 155, that the prevention improvement plan highlight report May 22.
Item 15, full plan. Can we note the plan, please?
Yeah.
Okay, Graham.
This is a recommendation, Chairman, to exclude the public service carried will stop from recording. The recommendation is that the public and press be excluded from the meeting by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12 of the 2, as the minutes contain information related to the financial or business affairs of a person, including the authority. And on these grounds, it is considered at this moment in time need information except for ways and public interest. Information, that's the recommendation, Chairman.
Great.
So we're just